We've all heard that classic chaos theory question, right? Like,
Hmm.
can a single butterfly flapping its wings cause a tornado on the exact opposite side of the world?
Right, yeah, the butterfly effect. Yep.
Exactly. And I mean, it is a really vivid image for a reason. The whole idea that a microscopic, totally isolated action could somehow spiral into massive systemic upheaval is, well, it's terrifying, honestly.
Oh, absolutely.
But, let's bring that concept out of the abstract and drop it directly into the digital age for you. Can a single retweet from a social media account with fewer than 100 followers cause, and I am quoting directly from our source material here, cause severe social disorder?
Yeah, that is a very, very different kind of butterfly.
Right.
And, well, from a legal standpoint, it's a much more dangerous kind of tornado to try and actually quantify.
Definitely. So welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack this staggering stack of documents that you've shared with us. We are looking at official court verdicts. We've got a self-defense document, which is basically a scholar's blood letter written directly from a prison cell.
Which is incredible to read, by the way.
It really is. And
Yeah.
we are synthesizing multiple comprehensive legal analyses that were generated by top-tier AI models. So we're talking about ChatGPT, Grok, and Gemini.
Yeah, it is a phenomenal collection of data. I mean, it pulls from criminal law, constitutional rights, international treaties, and, surprisingly enough, advanced network physics.
Which we will definitely get to. So we are exploring the case of Dr. Chen Jingyuan, a physical sciences PhD and independent scholar who was sentenced to 20 months in prison in China. And the core of his crime was literally just clicking retweet.
Just clicking a button. Yeah.
But before we get into the mechanics of how this actually happened, I do need to state something up front for you. Because these sources contain politically charged content regarding the Chinese judicial system and state policies, we want to be incredibly clear. We are not taking any sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content. Our goal is strictly to impartially report on the ideas, legal arguments, and scientific theories contained in these original source materials.
Exactly. Our focus is entirely on the structural logic of the arguments presented in this stack, breaking down how the legal and scientific frameworks collide in this one specific instance.
Yeah, the collision is the fascinating part. So we have this massive legal apparatus on one side, and then just a solitary scientist's Twitter account on the other.
Right.
How do these two worlds actually crash into each other? Let's take you back to the inciting incident. Can you paint the picture for us based on the case files?
Yeah, sure. So the documents put us in September 2022. This is in Kunming, which is a major city in Yunnan province.
Okay.
Dr. Chen Jingyuan is at home. He is an independent scholar. His life's work is researching nonlinear complex systems. And suddenly, plainclothes police just raid his residence.
Wow.
Yeah. They completely turn his life upside down. They confiscate his phones, his computers, his hard drives. They demand all of his passwords, and they take him into custody.
And the charge they slap him with is fascinating to me. It's called picking quarrels and provoking trouble. The AI analyses in our sources spent a lot of time dissecting this specific statute. They refer to it as a pocket crime.
Right. So the AI models heavily critique the structural nature of that specific law. A pocket crime is basically a colloquial term for a legal statute that is deliberately broad.
Vague, basically.
Extremely vague. It functions as a massive dragnet. Authorities can use it to criminalize a huge spectrum of behaviors that just, wouldn't fit neatly into specific, strictly defined legal categories.
So it gives the state a very convenient pocket to basically stuff any perceived provocation into.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because you would assume a sweeping charge like that, a criminal charge, requires some really heavy evidence.
Do you think so? Yeah.
But the evidence the police pulled from this pocket was literally just his activity on Twitter, which he accessed via a VPN.
Just a few retweets.
Right. They combed through his account and found a handful of retweets. And the subject matter is such an eclectic mix, too. He retweeted the Umbrella Girl comic from the Hong Kong protests. He shared a political caricature featuring Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. There was a photo of a candlelight vigil for Tiananmen Square, some historical documents highlighting edits made to Mao Zedong's selected works, and this one's wild, even a photo of a random retiree's pension slip.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at a combination of subjective art, historical preservation, and just really mundane social commentary.
Yeah.
But the nature of the content is really only half the story here. The court's ruling actually hinges on the scale of his digital footprint, which is arguably the most critical piece of data in these entire files.
Because it is microscopically small. I mean, Dr. Chen had fewer than 100 followers on this account.
Barely anyone.
Right. And the defense notes that these were predominantly zombie accounts, so basically bots or inactive users.
Yeah, no real engagement.
Exactly. And on top of that, over his entire history on the platform,
Yeah.
decades, basically, his total number of retweets numbered under 100.
And remember, the prosecution's burden here is to prove that this specific, nearly invisible digital footprint directly caused severe social disorder.
Which is crazy.
Right, because that is the hard legal threshold for a criminal conviction under the pick and quarrel statute.
To me, it sounds like being charged with starting a massive riot because you whispered a controversial opinion in a completely empty, soundproof room.
That's a really good way to put it.
I mean, how does the court even attempt to justify criminal conviction out of that?
Well, the Kunming court circumvented the empty room problem entirely. They just didn't look at the impact of the whisper at all.
Okay, so what did they look at?
They evaluated the pedigree of the whisperer.
You have to explain that, because the logic in the verdict reading through it is just wild to me.
It really is. So the court's primary logic relied heavily on Dr. Chen's academic background.
Right.
He is a quote-unquote highly educated person with a PhD in physical sciences. So the court explicitly reasoned that someone with that level of advanced education inherently possesses the ability to perfectly distinguish right from wrong.
Okay, so they're saying he's smart, he should know better.
Exactly. Following that logic, they concluded he must have known that the subjective content he was sharing constituted false information and rumors.
Wow. So they literally weaponized his own diploma against him.
They did. And the AI legal reports uniformly tear into this argument.
I bet.
Yeah, ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, they all flag this as a severe violation of the presumption of innocence. The models classify this as a discriminatory identity-based presumption.
Because they're not proving what he did, they're just pointing at who he is.
Right. The court bypassed the need to prove actual criminal malice by substituting his academic degree as definitive proof of intent.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Right.
Let's set the PhD aside. Even if we accept the court's premise, couldn't they argue that subjective art can incite real-world action? Like, people have absolutely rioted over political cartoons before.
That's true, they have.
So why can't a court classify an inflammatory drawing as false information if it technically threatens the peace?
Well, the defense and the AI analyses actually tackle that exact counter-argument. They do it by drawing a really hard line between subjective expression and objective reality.
Okay, how so?
They rely heavily on the philosopher Karl Popper. Have you heard of him?
Just a bit, yeah.
So Popper's core tenet is falsifiability. Basically, for a statement to be scientifically or legally classified as a rumor or a falsehood, it must first make a factual claim that can be objectively proven false.
Okay, give me a concrete example of that distinction so I can picture it.
Sure. If you tweet, the bank on Main Street is bankrupt and closing tomorrow, that is a verifiable claim.
Right. You can check the bank's records.
Exactly. If the bank is perfectly solvent, your tweet is objectively false. It can be falsified. But art like the Umbrella Girl comic or a caricature of two presidents, that operates entirely in the realm of symbolism, metaphor, and emotion.
Ah, I see.
You cannot fact-check a drawing of a girl with an umbrella. You just can't. You cannot scientifically prove a subjective feeling false.
So the court is essentially looking at a metaphorical painting and declaring it mathematically incorrect.
Yes, exactly.
They're making a massive category mistake.
They are forcing abstract cultural expressions into a binary legal definition of falsehood, which just violates basic logic. I mean, you can't regulate poetry using the rules of arithmetic.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Dr. Chen recognizes this illogical framework, right? And he decides not to just argue the law.
Right.
He uses his own highly specialized scientific expertise to effectively turn his criminal trial into a postgraduate physics lecture.
His defense strategy is genuinely brilliant. He brings his life's work into the courtroom.
Yeah.
He utilizes complex systems theory, snowball dynamics, and network topology to mathematically disprove the prosecution's entire theory of causality.
I was reading through this section of his blood letter, and he starts throwing out terms like edge nodes and branching ratios. I mean, he is using literal network physics to prove his innocence.
He really is.
Break down the science for us. How does he apply this to a Twitter account?
Okay, so in network science, a platform like Twitter is viewed as a massive, intricate web of connections. Dr. Chen identifies himself within this web as a long-tail edge node.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning he is sitting out on the absolute furthest, darkest, most disconnected fringes of the network. He has no real influence. He then introduces the concept of the branching ratio.
Right, and the best way to understand the branching ratio, I think, is to think about epidemiology. Like, think about the R naught, the basic reproduction number of a virus.
That's a perfect analogy, actually.
Yeah, for a virus to become a pandemic, the R naught has to be greater than 1. One sick person infects 2 people, those 2 infect 4, and the spread basically goes exponential.
That is the exact same math used for information cascades. For a retweet to go viral and cause any kind of widespread societal impact, its branching ratio must be greater than 1.
Okay.
But Dr. Chen maps his own network data for the court. Because he is an edge node with 0 active engaged followers, his branching ratio is drastically less than 1.
So it's basically a dead end.
Exactly. He is operating in what physics categorizes as a deep subcritical zone.
And he backed this up by citing the Galton-Watson extinction theorem.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is how uncompromising that mathematical theorem is.
How so?
The Galton-Watson theorem models branching processes over time. It proves mathematically that if a node's branching ratio is strictly under 1, the probability of that node's signal, or its retweet dying out instantly, is essentially 100%.
Oh, wow. So it's not even a guess, it's a mathematical certainty.
Exactly. The mathematics dictate that the exact moment Dr. Chen hits the retweet button, the information cascade ceases to exist. It goes nowhere. It influences no one.
So he scientifically proves that it is physically impossible for his specific action to have caused any disorder, let alone the severe social disorder required by the law.
Right. But he doesn't just stop at his own node, though. He actually zooms out to analyze the entire societal structure by introducing a concept called self-organized criticality, or SOC.
SOC, this is the avalanche theory, right? Like, how does that explain severe social disorder?
Yeah. So SOC explains the behavior of highly complex macrosystems. It states that if a massive network does experience a catastrophic avalanche, or in this context, like a massive social riot,
Right.
it is never the fault of a single minor input. It happens because the entire macrosystem was already hovering in a highly sensitive supercritical state.
I think we need a tangible analogy for this because self-organized criticality is a pretty heavy concept to visualize.
Totally.
Okay, imagine a massive city's traffic grid.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Blaming an isolated edge node like Dr. Chen for systemic disorder is like blaming a single pedestrian crossing a quiet suburban street for causing a massive structural traffic gridlock in the absolute heart of downtown.
I love that because the pedestrian has a 0 physical influence on the downtown intersection that's miles away.
Precisely. And that is his point. It's a fundamental error in causality.
Yeah. If the downtown grid is completely locked up, it's not the pedestrian's fault. It is because the city's infrastructure lacked alternate routes, the traffic lights were completely out of sync, and the roads were operating at, say, 300% capacity.
The system itself is broken.
Right. The traffic system was already at a supercritical state. The pedestrian was merely a drop of water falling into a bucket that was already overflowing.
A single whisper in an empty room cannot cause an avalanche unless the snow was already inevitably coming down.
That's exactly it.
I mean, it is an airtight mathematical defense. But despite the physics, and honestly despite basic logic, the Kunming court still sentenced him to 20 months in prison.
They did.
Which really brings us to the next massive layer of this deep dive. If domestic law required proof of severe disorder that was mathematically impossible to provide, how does international law view this kind of prosecution?
This raises a really important question regarding international obligations, and the AI models tackle this head-on.
Yeah, I saw that in the reports.
Yeah, all of the AI analyses in our stack, whether it's ChatGPT, Grok, Qwen, or DeepSeek, they all evaluated this verdict through the lens of international human rights law, specifically the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the ICESCR.
Right. And just to set the table for you really quick, the ICSCR is a foundational United Nations human rights treaty. And crucially for this case, it is a treaty that China has officially signed.
Exactly. And by signing that treaty, a state assumes an international legal obligation not to defeat its object and purpose.
Makes sense.
The AI reports repeatedly highlight 2 specific articles of the ICSCR that are violently at odds with Dr. Chen's prosecution, Article 13 and Article 15.
Okay, let's start with Article 15. The text explicitly guarantees the right of everyone to take part in cultural life and to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications.
Yes. And then Article 13 is the foundation for the right to education, which the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights actually interprets as heavily reliant on the absolute protection of academic freedom.
Meaning scholars need to be able to do their work.
Right. Scholars must have the liberty to discover and disseminate information freely.
But how does the AI connect the act of retweeting a comic or a historical photo to the grand concept of scientific progress? I feel like a skeptic might say he was just goofing off on Twitter.
Well, the models connect it by looking at the methodology of a researcher. Like, what was Dr. Chen actually doing?
Right.
He was actively gathering scattered data. He was comparing international viewpoints.
He was observing.
Exactly. He was observing political caricatures to gauge public sentiment, saving historical documents to track narrative shifts, and reading foreign policy speeches. He was exploring diverse, complex ideas to feed his understanding of macro systems.
Right, which was his field of study.
Under international law, exposing yourself to a multitude of perspectives is the very definition of participating in cultural life and conducting scientific research.
So he wasn't building a weapon. He was building a knowledge base. He was just observing the world.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the AI analyses warn of a massive systemic danger here.
Yeah.
By using criminal law, especially a vague pocket crime like picking quarrels, to punish the mere act of researching or saving unpopular perspectives, the state engineers a devastating chilling effect.
The chilling effect. This is where fear actively degrades societal progress. Right?
Precisely the issue. When the scientific community sees an independent scholar imprisoned simply for reading and archiving diverse data, human nature naturally kicks in.
I get scared.
Yeah, they will inevitably self-censor. They will steer clear of controversial yet vital research topics. And as a result, the natural, free-flowing exchange of scientific knowledge and cultural dialogue just becomes totally paralyzed.
And notice DeepSeek's analysis in your documents took this a step further, too. It noted that this chilling effect is a direct violation of a state's positive obligation under the treaty.
Right.
Meaning a state isn't just supposed to avoid hindering science, it is legally required to actively create an environment where science and culture can dynamically develop.
You cannot foster innovation in an environment where observing a dissenting data point is suddenly a criminal offense. It just doesn't work.
So what does this all mean? Like, why should you, listening to this right now, care about an independent researcher in Kunming catching a pocket charge for a microscopic Twitter account?
It's a valid question.
Well, because this case touches on the fundamental mechanics of how human civilization actually sustains itself. Civilization absolutely relies on the friction of different ideas.
Yes.
It relies on the ability for a citizen to look at a system, spot its flaws, point at them, and debate them out in the open.
Because friction is really the only mechanism through which a society learns and adapts to new challenges.
Exactly. When a system removes the right for its citizens to look at diverse information, when it basically criminalizes the basic act of observing and sharing different perspectives, it sacrifices its own ability to self-correct.
Right.
It stops innovating, it stops growing, and it becomes dangerously rigid.
And, returning to Dr. Chen's physics defense for a second, a healthy, resilient system must have the capacity to absorb minor fluctuations.
Like the butterfly wings.
Exactly. If a macro system is so deeply fragile that a single edge node retweeting an umbrella drawing is perceived as an existential threat, well, the problem does not lie with the node.
It lies with the system.
The problem is the structural, foundational instability of the system itself.
Wow. Let's take a breath and recap the incredible journey we've just been on today. We started with a late-night police raid and an arrest over a handful of obscure, barely seen retweets.
Barely a whisper.
Right. And from there, we dug into the weaponization of an academic degree. We unpacked Karl Popper's theory of falsifiability to prove you can't fact-check art. We explored the quantum physics of social networks using the Galton-Watson theorem. And finally, we examined the vital protections demanded by international human rights law.
We truly moved from the microaction of a computer mouse click to the macro dynamics of global civilizational health.
We really did.
It is just a perfect example of how a single, isolated legal case can sit squarely at the intersection of universal, mathematical, and philosophical principles.
It is an absolutely unforgettable stack of sources. But before we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over on your own.
Yeah.
Something that builds on the incredible complex systems theory we unpacked today.
So we learned from Dr. Chen's mathematical defense that a minor edge node simply does not possess the energetic power to crash a stable system. The branching ratio guarantees that the signal will extinguish.
And math proves it.
But in the broader field of complex systems theory, there is another highly established principle. Macro systems actively require noise, friction, and dissenting nodes to remain adaptable and resilient.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, without those constant minor stressors, a system loses its elasticity. It becomes brittle.
Essentially loses its immune system, right?
Yeah.
Because it is never exposed to anything new.
Exactly, and this raises an important question for you to consider. What if, by using extreme disproportionate force to silence every single minor edge node, a rigid system isn't actually protecting itself?
What do you mean?
Well, what if, by eradicating all the natural noise, friction, and feedback, the system actually pushes itself closer and closer to the very critical state of collapse it is trying so desperately to avoid?
Man, that is a haunting thought. Does total control actually guarantee an eventual catastrophic avalanche? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep reading, and most importantly, keep questioning the information around you. And remember, the next time you hear about a butterfly flapping its wings, ask yourself, is the real danger the butterfly or the atmosphere that's just waiting to tear itself apart?